You are watching a film about African wildlife. There is danger for the future of African wildlife, and this film is about that danger. And yet there is hope, and this film is about that hope. The first danger is poaching. This is Murchison Falls National Park in Uganda. Here, poachers enter the park along the river. If they are seen, a ranger patrol is sent out. The poachers have come to kill crocodiles for their skins or elephants for their ivory tusks. These are sold against the law for a high profit. But poaching expeditions are not always successful. This time, the Ranger Patrol takes the group by surprise. For the elephant, the Rangers are too late. The damage has already been done. But the tusks will not be sold by the poachers. They will be removed and turned over to the National Parks Department. Poaching has brought several kinds of animals near extinction. Elephants were once common over much of Africa. Now you will find them in only a few small areas where killing them is forbidden. But even here, the poachers come. Hunting wildlife for food is more understandable, but this kind of poaching is stealing something from the land that was once beautiful and exciting. This time, only one of the poachers was captured. He is taken to the park headquarters for a light fine or jail sentence. The canoes are kept here for 6 months before they are sold to local tribesmen, often to the original owners. This man is not a poacher. He is taking part in an animal cropping operation. This is a desperate program to deal with the second danger threatening African wildlife, the danger of overcrowding. As Africa's people spread out into what was once wild land, the animals are forced to overcrowd the small reserve areas that are left. Then their large numbers ruin the land and upset the balance of nature. Here is further and more vivid evidence of the plight of African wildlife today. With poaching in one area and overcrowding in another, these animals face a difficult and uncertain future. The burden of that future has been placed on the shoulders of Africans who now govern most of the countries where wildlife abounds. Here in the heart of Central Africa, 1,500 square miles have been set aside for wildlife. Across these rolling grasslands live many kinds of animals. These are buffalo. They are the same today as they were thousands of years ago. They are the same, that is, except for numbers. With the overcrowding, green hills give way to barren ground. And along the river, the banks turn brown from the overgrazing of elephant and hippo. The river is the Victoria Nile, flowing from Lake Victoria. It was here that in the middle of the 19th century, Samuel Baker discovered the Murchison Falls. It was surrounding this river in the middle of the 20th century that the Murchison Falls Park was established. And it was here that in 1965, a new idea in wildlife conservation was put into practice. To the park's headquarters at Para was added a Wildlife Education Center. The purpose of this center is to interest Africans in their wildlife heritage and to teach them how to care for that heritage. The center is sponsored by the African Wildlife Leadership Foundation. It is based on the belief that the root cause of the crisis for African wildlife is ignorance. Ignorance of the value of game as a natural resource and ignorance of proper land use principles and techniques. Education is the one cure for ignorance. The foundation has other projects based on the same belief, but the Uganda Center is the most recent. Plans for the building are discussed overlooking its proposed site. In the beginning, Americans worked together with Abundio Odur, the park warden. Later, Africans will run the center. The project will provide housing and educational facilities, and visitors to the center will be young Africans from the surrounding towns and villages. Dietrich Schaff, a young American, was sent to organize the center. But first came the problem of language, so he began by learning Acholi, the local African dialect. At the same time, his teacher was learning English from Dietrich, and at some point the language barrier was crossed. Which language is the more difficult is hard to say, but in this part of Uganda, both must be known. Leaving the park's headquarters, Dietrich travels to the Chobe district to make a first-hand study of the problems of wildlife management. Here again is the damage caused by too many elephant and hippo. Overcrowding is understandable when you realize that less than 0.5% of Africa's land is set aside for wildlife. The animals have no place else to go. In Murchison Falls Park alone, 2,000 elephants and 4,000 hippos had to be cropped for the land to recover and the survivors to prosper. But Africa is not only unusual for its big game, there are many smaller creatures unknown elsewhere in the world. Here is a paradise for the insect collector. Among Africa's insects are the nearly 3,000 kinds of butterflies. Mounting a few of these for display will form part of an exhibition showing the variety of Africa's smaller wildlife. At times, insects in Africa have been harmful to man, but helpful to animals. There used to be a large number of tsetse flies around the Victoria Nile. These kept people from living there, and later the national park was established. Now, with the modern insect sprays, new areas are open to man, and the animals are again pressed until they overcrowd. It's a strange twist of fate. Everyone was curious about the new project, and Dietrich made many friends. But for this one, more interesting than conservation was a nearby vat of African beer. As news of the new project spread, student visitors began to arrive. Dietrich's task was to teach them the value of wildlife. For generations, Africans have regarded it mainly as food or as a crop-damaging nuisance. But now they are told the fact that East Africa brings in more than $20 million a year from tourists who have come to see the animals. Then they learn of their national heritage. These animals must be proudly preserved as the unique national heritage of the new African states. But best of all is the wonder of seeing this wildlife as it is, born free and living free on the plains of Africa. This is what brings the tourists from around the world. For most Africans, trips like these give them their first view of large wild animals. They have never before seen their own wildlife heritage. Here by the shores of Lake Albert, some of the finest game viewing in Africa takes place. The African elephant may weigh more than 7 tons. It is the largest land animal on Earth. When families are together, the cow elephant is often the most dangerous. She will make threatening charges to defend her young. Heading for the water, this elephant is accompanied by an escort of white egrets. Elephants eat over 300 pounds of vegetation a day. Eat about 16 hours out of every 24. Imagine eating like this for 60 to 70 years, and you will have some idea what it's like to be an elephant. The most common animals on the African plains are the antelopes. There are more than 60 different kinds. The hartebeest is common in East Africa. It is often very shy when approached. The kob, on the other hand, is found only in Uganda. African hunting dogs are rarely seen and more rarely photographed in Murchison Falls Park. They hunt often in pairs, one chasing the prey and the other springing on it from ambush. They are greatly feared by the antelopes. The rhinoceros is the second largest land animal. They are heavily poached for their horns. One kind, the white rhinoceros, is now near extinction. But there are some left, and here is one of them. This is not exactly an ordinary rhinoceros. When very young, she was brought to the park for protection. Now she's uncertain what kind of animal she is. She wallows with buffaloes, grazes with elephants, and takes her afternoon naps at this ranger post in the company of people. Have you ever seen a rhinoceros yawn? This is how she shows her affection for the foundation. And so the word went out, and the students came. The program was greeted with such interest that thousands of students had visited the park before construction on the permanent building had even begun. This was a good sign, for these are the children of Noah, whose task it will be to save the wildlife of their land. And so they came by bus and by truck. They came from towns and villages as near as 60 miles and as far as 360 miles. And they saw the wild sights and took away memories and hopes. Most interesting of all is the riverboat trip. Traveling along the Nile in these boats, you can see many animals living in and about the water. Here is a strip of nature unchanged for thousands of years. This is the hippopotamus. Surprisingly, it can run quickly on land, while in water it's a powerful swimmer. But it also walks and even runs along the bottom. At night, hippos leave the water to graze along the riverbanks. One may eat 100 pounds of grass in a single night. Here is 8,000 pounds of hippopotamus. Hippos generally live in friendly groups, but some are left with the scars of family battles. They are born underwater and stay close by their mothers for protection. But against man, there is little protection for young or old. Hippos are now rarely seen along the African rivers. Going up the river, we see other animals. Some are small and more cautious than the lumbering hippopotamus. Baboons look down from the branches of trees. They march along the banks. One baby rides on the back of its mother. At a shriek of alarm, the whole troop bounds up the nearest tree, waiting for the danger to pass. Buffalo are watering at the river's edge. There is often a little tip bird along for the ride while looking for insects. Then there are the birds. 2,500 species are known throughout Africa. The fish eagle perches, watching for its prey. There are the storks and cranes and herons. Some are only winter visitors who spend their summers in Europe and the Near East. The Goliath heron, nesting with her young. Egyptian geese, the same as those that appear in the tomb paintings of the pharaohs 1,500 miles downstream. But of all the wildlife, the elephant is still the most wonderful. Strong enough to uproot trees and gentle enough to dine on twigs, charging in a mad fury or peacefully drinking at the water's edge. The elephant is an animal of intelligence. It has feelings very much like a person's, and people who see wild elephants are fascinated by them. To watch the quiet spectacle of its life unfolding before your eyes is an experience no one quickly forgets. So the boat trip is enjoyed by students of all ages. Dietrich Schaff does his best to answer the many questions which arise. The young Africans are at times bewildered by the strange new sights, but always curious and interested. They even do some of the game spotting themselves. The Nile crocodile, slithering off the bank, reminds us of the day when dinosaurs ruled the earth. Crocodiles used to live along all African rivers, but this stretch of water is now the only one where they abound as they did of old. At the slightest alarm, crocodiles enter the water for safety. One way they cool themselves and have their teeth cleaned at the same time is to lie along the bank with their mouths wide open. Crocodiles have been the most threatening animals along the riverbanks. Today, they are threatened. The demand for crocodile skin leather goods is leading this creature down the road to extinction. The riverboat trip comes to an end with the same surprise that greeted the explorer Samuel Baker 100 years ago. For around this bend, the Murchison Falls. Here the Victoria Nile rushes through a cleft in the rock only 20 feet wide. This is savage wilderness, fast disappearing from the world. It draws those who seek the wild places as yet untouched by man. But it has also drawn the engineers, and already in 1965, a plan was underway to convert Murchison Falls into a hydroelectric scheme. The falls is in the middle of a national park, but even here, it suffers the fate of all wild things when man comes before them with his eyes closed to the beauty of nature. If you travel southeast for 400 miles, the ground flattens and the green hills of Uganda give way to Kenya's yellow-brown plains. You arrive at Nairobi, and in particular, the Nairobi National Park. Here, backed up against the nation's capital, is a wild animal preserve. It might be called the world's most unusual zoo. There are no cages, and for 44 square miles, lions stalk the veldt as a city rises on the horizon. It was here that the old hunting safaris used to depart for the outlying districts. It was here that one of the first national parks in East Africa was founded. And it was here, in the summer of 1964, that the African Wildlife Leadership Foundation established its first wildlife education center. The center was started under the direction of Donald Taylor, Lloyd Sherman, and Robert Milne. Lloyd Sherman conducts a group of the 10,000 students who had already visited the center before it was officially underway. These are secondary school students, many of whom will go on to a university education, and a few of whom will one day be leaders of their country. And so, as they examine the exhibits, there is a purpose which goes beyond their present interest. There comes a new respect for nature, and from that respect, a new concern for the future of wildlife, as well as the remains of its past. A future which no longer depends upon the resources of nature, but upon the will and efforts of man. Only the interest and understanding of the young Africans can save their wildlife. As they begin to show this interest, the efforts of the foundation are rewarded, and the prospect for Africa's wildlife brightens. Behind the Education Center is the Animal Orphanage for Stray Wildlife. The educational groups visit the orphanage as well as the park. Cece the chimpanzee. She's delighted to meet new people. She's also curious about such things as this skull of her cousin, the baboon. Here are more Patas monkeys. Even in Kenya, they are not known for their polite manners, and stealing one's brother's food is a common practice. Among the other animals, the students are able to see one of the smallest antelopes in the world, the dik-dik. A young giraffe has been brought to the orphanage. Too weak even to stand, it is being looked after with a special diet. When it is well, it will be released into the park. Again, it is the park excursion that highlights a visit to the center. The foundation has provided 3 minibuses to bring student visitors face to face with the Kenya plains. Here we take our last look at the animals of Africa. The grace of a long neck, world's tallest animal. The giraffe dines off the upper branches of acacia thorn trees 18 feet from the ground. Again, long necks, ostriches. A lone male jealously stands guard over the ladies of his harem. Thompson's gazelle, one of the trademarks of the African veldt. Again the baboon, not shy as in Uganda, but bold and curious, unafraid of people. And the wildebeest, the wise old men of the plains. This is the wildlife of Africa, and its future is uncertain. It is threatened by poaching and by the overcrowding of reserves because of the misuse of land. Africans have now inherited the challenge of providing for their wildlife's future. The African Wildlife Leadership Foundation works to ensure African interest and skill in meeting this challenge. In turn, your interest and support are needed to ensure the success of the Foundation's programs. Only if all these steps are taken today will Africa's wildlife live on tomorrow.